Bad things happen to good people, especially when it comes to foreclosure and the aspects of foreclosure. If you're a buyer, you're looking to buy foreclosed property, or if you're a seller facing foreclosure, there's situations where bad can become much worse, especially with foreclosures. Now, to introduce myself, my name is Troy Funk, and that's Funk, F-U-N-K, Fun K, and I have been a resident and I have been in real estate sales going on 4 decades here on the central west coast of Florida, and I have a lot of experience with foreclosure from a personal standpoint and also in helping other people with getting out of foreclosure. And I've had years where I've handled over 100 foreclosure cases. I am not an attorney. I am actually a real estate broker in Florida, and I have a lot of experience with foreclosure. So I want to share that experience and talk about the worst possible situations if you are a buyer looking to buy a foreclosure, or if you're a seller facing foreclosure, what to be concerned of. So if you are an owner and you have owned your property for more than 2 years and you're facing foreclosure, the probability is that you have a lot of equity in the property because property values have appreciated so much. This is really good news because that's not how it was years back when we saw a foreclosure crisis where we had a lot of properties going in foreclosure. Sellers had no equity. So in essence, when they walked out of the home, they got nothing for it. They didn't get any of their equity out. Well, in this case, there's equity on the table in a lot of cases. So if you own your property and you're facing foreclosure and you have a lot of equity, the probability is you're going to want to pull your equity out sooner than later. Now, this is how things can go from bad to much worse when you're in that situation. Now, let's just say that your house is worth $500,000 and your mortgage is $400,000. So you owe that $100,000 is potential equity that belongs to you when you sell the property minus your closing cost. So that's your money, right? Well, here's where it gets problematic. If you're facing foreclosure, that $400,000 that is owed to the bank starts to increase drastically. And why does it do that? Well, the lender is foreclosing. They're suing you for ownership of the property. Who do you think is going to pay those legal fees? The lender is tacking those fees onto what is owed to your mortgage. So in essence, even though you owe $400,000, you owe $400,000 plus the bank's attorney's fees, back payments, property preservation fees. All that stuff adds up. That's all expense that's eating away your equity. And this is where it gets really challenging. Now, I know of a situation on a home we just sold, and the house was vacant. And the lender, because the house was vacant, even though it was owned by this owner, had the right to secure the property and do a property preservation. Now, when we went to close on that property, the cost of that property preservation for the bank changing the locks, overseeing the property, was in excess of $10,000. That was all money taken away from the seller on the closing of their property because they left the house vacant and the bank took control of the property. So that's just one example on top of attorney's fees where your expenses start going way up when you're in foreclosure. So when you're in foreclosure, you risk losing your equity if you don't act. So that's a big aspect. This is where things go from bad to worse. By waiting too late, you risk losing all your equity in the sale of that property. So what if you're a buyer and you're looking to buy a property in foreclosure? Well, there's 3 main ways to buy a property that's a foreclosure, so to speak. There's the pre-foreclosure process, there's the buying the property from the courthouse steps, and then buying the property after it's been foreclosed from the lender. So let's first talk about pre-foreclosure. Now, pre-foreclosure is absolutely the best way to buy a property that's in foreclosure, and here's why. Number one, as a buyer, you're still in control of that process. This is the process where you can negotiate with a very motivated seller that's living in the property. You can have a due diligence period most of the time, which means you go in, you can have your inspections done, you can see the inside of the house, you know what you're buying, and most importantly, you can get title insurance on that property and get clear title of the property. Even though the seller is behind on their mortgage, they may not have paid their HOA fees, they're not paying their water bill, all those liens, even though they're on that property, they all have to be cleared up when the property is transferred to you. When the property is conveyed to you as the buyer, all those fees are paid, and you're given a title policy, typically a title insurance policy that protects you from the title. That's a good way to buy a property because you're getting clear title. What's also good is in that due diligence process, you're also able to get financing. So if you're not cash and you don't have all the cash up front to buy that property, you can buy a pre-foreclosure with financing if the home is in good condition. Now, if you're a veteran and the home is in good condition, you could possibly buy a pre-foreclosure even with 100% financing. So this is real good news if you're looking for a good value and you want to be protected with your title. You want to make sure you have a due diligence to inspect the home and thoroughly know what you're getting into when you buy that property. That's a good way to buy a property. Now, I specialize in pre-foreclosures. I help sellers out of foreclosure, and with that, I have an inventory of homes that are in foreclosure that we need to sell. So I do have a VIP list that I provide to those that reach out that are motivated to buy, because I have sellers that are motivated to sell. So pre-foreclosure, good way to buy a property in this market. Another way to buy a property is at the courthouse. And in the old days, we would actually physically go to the courthouse steps. You had to be present there with money in your pocket, so to speak, and it was a public auction. The high bidder wins the property. And at that point, you were paying all cash for that house. Well, the process has changed quite a bit, but it's still somewhat the same. I mean, you are still buying the property from the courthouse, but now, depending on what county you're in, it's normally handled online. But here's the problem situation. You still need to come up with all that cash the day of the sale, whether you've seen the property or not. And that's where it gets real challenging, because a lot of times when a seller's facing foreclosure, if they're still in the property, they don't want anybody. They don't want people coming to their home, asking if they can see it. It's still their property up to the day that the bank owns the property. So, harassing the former owner to look at the property that they don't want to sell is, very problematic, right? It's not a happy situation to buy in that situation, because they don't want you there, right? If they did, the house would be on the market, and they don't have the house on the market. They want to stay in their home. So it's challenging to deal in a hostile situation to even see the house. And then when you do buy it, you have to pay cash for the property. And here's the worst thing: you're not given clear title, where you actually have clear title of the property. You're not getting title insurance at the courthouse steps. You have a time to do a title search, but it doesn't mean you're getting clear title. And I could think of a situation that happened here in this neighborhood. This is a real nice neighborhood in Sarasota. And I remember an investor bragging about how he bought a property at the courthouse steps, 50% of the value of the property. Well, here's how the end of that story went out. Yes, he did go to the courthouse steps. Yes, he was a high bidder. And yes, on paper, he got the property half of its value, except he didn't realize he was buying a second mortgage and not a first mortgage. He bought this home in this neighborhood, put on a brand new roof, started renovating the property, and then he was served with foreclosure papers because he didn't have clear title. Now, what that meant was if that property was foreclosed, even though he paid cash for that property, and even though he was the owner of the property and his name is not on the mortgage being foreclosed, that foreclosure is going to take title to that property away from him. So in essence, even though he had a couple $100,000 invested in this property, he was going to be completely wiped out because he bought a property that did not have clear title. So what was the end result? Well, he had to pay off the first mortgage, and by doing so, for what he had in the house on the second mortgage and the first mortgage and all the money he paid, he bought a home way over market value at that time because he thought he was getting a good deal at the courthouse steps. That's a problem with buying a property at the courthouse steps. You're not getting clear title. So in closing, if you are a seller or if you're a buyer, understand foreclosure is a legal process. And that's where it gets complicated. There's things that you need to know. And obviously, if you're dealing with somebody that's experienced in that realm of foreclosures, you're going to get the best representation on that. Now, if you're a seller, I strongly recommend that you know all your options before you make a decision. And once you make that decision, make it quickly. If you have equity in your property, get your equity out as soon as possible and be proactive in selling that property, because the longer you wait, the less you're potentially getting from all these junky fees that are being added to your loan to foreclose against you, right? Not fair. If you're a buyer, understand there's multiple ways to buy a foreclosure. There's pre-foreclosure, there's at the courthouse steps, or there's REO. Now again, you have to look at your scenario. If you are a finance buyer, the best opportunities are typically in pre-foreclosure situations. Finance buyers cannot buy property at the courthouse steps. Finance buyers have a challenge in finding REOs because they're typically competing against hedge funds to buy these properties. Now, I know a lot of things change, and life's a moving target, so as I speak, that's where we are right now. I know there's laws in place that are giving buyers first look on some properties, and that's going to be the narrative on properties that are owned by the bank. But again, best opportunity right now, if you're looking for a good value, consider pre-foreclosures. That's a good option. I hope I've been helpful to you in just understanding how bad can go from worse if you just don't know your options or you don't take action quickly once you know the best plan. Again, my name is Troy Funk, F-U-N-K, Funk. If I can be of any help to you, feel free to reach out to me, and I look forward to seeing you on my next video.